Hello my fellow book lovers, Liz here and welcome to my channel. So today I wanted to talk to you guys about Clockwork Orange by Mr. Anthony Burgess. So this book was actually a book recommended to me by my friend Kaylin. She told me that I just had to read this book and I went with her to go pick it out. So glad I did. It's a very, very good book. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads for a few different reasons. I really wish I could have given it a 5. I almost did, but there's just this one thing. But yes, so this is going to be a spoiler-free and spoilery review. I will let you guys know whenever I start going into spoilery details for this novel. So let me get started with my actual non-spoilery review. So I told you I gave this book a 4 out of 5. The world is done and built in such a unique way where literally the world is built through the language, which is something that I haven't had the opportunity to read very much, so that was very, very exciting. It is told in first person, and you have one of the most unreliable characters I have ever read in fiction. This is considered a modern fiction. It was written in the 1960s, and then just recently it was revised because the American version only had 20 chapters and the original manuscript had 21. So if you're going to pick this book up, I highly, highly recommend you pick up the new version, which is the one with 21 chapters. Because if you do not read that 21st chapter, the whole book would have a completely different meaning. Okay, so we have our humble narrator, Alex, who is the main protagonist in the story and who the story follows. He is a 15-year-old boy who lives in this ultra-violence world. Literally, people are violent for the sake of being violent, and the government cannot control the people. There isn't cops. You know, these kids are very smart, very almost militaristic in the way that they do things. Even in the opening scene, you see that everything they do, they have a backup plan for, or at least they think they have a backup plan for it. There is a lot of violence in this book, so if you're not into that, that might be something that will sway you away from it. But I will tell you that the violence is a big part of the story, but it's not explicit violence. Like, it hints at what's going on without actually explicitly telling you exactly what's going on. There are a few mentions of rape and sexual assault in this book, but again, they are not explicit like you would think. I was very much surprised at the subtlety in that aspect. I was really, really expecting it to be like, bam, in your face, you know, violent, because it does say it's an ultra-violent novel. But it's not. So if that sways you, I suggest, you know, to still give it a go. If you don't feel comfortable in the first part of this story, which is chapters 1 through 7, the first part, then I said maybe you wouldn't want to keep going with this story. The language in the book is literally a character of its own. Like, the language carries half the book, I think, for the most part. That's one of the reasons I did not give it a 5, though, is because we didn't get a dictionary or a glossary or anything really for us to understand the words that are being said. My friend read it, heard it, she audiobooked it. I actually read it, so I feel like she had an easier time, you know, understanding maybe what was going on as opposed to what I did. But I know the first 3 chapters were really, really hard to get into. Not because the story, like, was not good. It was just I had to keep rereading things to make sure I knew exactly what was going on. But still, I recommend this book. It is considered a modern classic. I feel like if you've ever seen Fight Club would ultimately, you know, be the catalyst to what this world would be, if that makes any sense. Like, Fight Club would be where it all started for this particular world. So I suggest you go pick it up and read it. If you are maybe a younger reader, or someone who's not as experienced in like older literature, might be a little more difficult to get into. And don't mean like that insulting or anything, like you're dumb or anything. But I know if I would have read this in high school, I wouldn't have read it. I would have just be like, what the hell is this? Like, ugh. Can you please get this ugly thing away from me? It doesn't make sense. This is in English. So yeah, go into it with that kind of mentality, because it is literally like mindfuck. But yes, that is gonna be the end of my spoiler-free review. I don't know if I do a good job of a spoiler-free, but that's it. So we're gonna get into some of the spoilery parts of this book. So I'll give you guys a second to exit out and go read it, and then come back and we can talk about it. Okay, so this book, wow, like I said, reminded me of Fight Club because I literally watched this like the day after I finished reading it. It was such an interesting concept. The world was very intriguing. The things that happened were very intriguing. Like I said, the first 3 chapters were really hard for me to get into because he didn't give us a dictionary. He didn't tell me how to say the words. I had to make up. I'm pretty sure 90% of the time I didn't know what the hell I was saying. But I said it anyway. I like said it in my head anyway. That was the most frustrating part of the whole thing. Once I got to the second part for sure though, like I was like, it was good. I did not have any trouble at all kind of using my reading skills to interpret what was going on in the story. But yes, that's the only thing I think I had such a frustrating time with it, because I was like, what the hell is going on? And I had to read the first couple scenes the first time. Like that very first scene when we first get introduced to Alex and his drugs, where like they go into this like bar and they buy, everybody drinks, and then they go out to destroy like a flower shop and just screw it up, and then they come back and just be like, yeah, we were here the whole time. And that's kind of when you understand what kind of world we're living in, you know, or they're living in, sorry. So that was the very first instance. Then they got in a fight with the other dude where I'm pretty sure they like ended up almost killing the poor kid, which I mean, they were kind of drugs too. The women were treated really badly in the story too. I just realized, like, I don't even know how to say Malaki. I'm not even gonna try. One of the women was getting raped probably in the first part of it, gang raped in the first part of it. When they go into that old man's house, the writer's house, who's working on the Clockwork Orange, they end up, you know, gang raping his wife and just destroying him. And then they decide to drive back, and you know what, you're like, you know what, instead of somebody else picking this car up, we're just gonna make sure nobody else can get it, and we're gonna throw it in the river. I'm like, okay, Alex, you're great. And he calls himself your humble narrator. The moment he says that, you know he is going to be the most unreliable person in this entire story, and it is. And I like that about this particular story, like, you really saw his thought process and how he did not think anything he was doing was bad when we knew it was. He kind of knew it was, like when he was at that vinyl shop or the CD shop or the music shop and he saw those 2 10-year-old girls. The moment he's like, I got a really bad idea, I was like, he's either gonna beat them up or he's going to sexually assault them. And what do we know? He goes and takes them back, gets them drunk, and then he rapes them. Although I do think he feels a little bit bad at the end of it. He does mention in a part where he like kind of feels like dirty almost because the girls are leaving. So there's like a little bit of hope for me, at least, at that part. But I was really like, that goes again with it not being explicit. It tells you that he did something to the girls, but he literally tells you, I'm not going to go into gruesome details, because we kind of know what he's doing. There's no need for you to tell us too. Like that would just be bad. Then we go on to, you know, him saying that he's leader position, and his other drogues do not like that idea. Like, we don't have leaders, that's the whole point. And you know from that moment things are gonna go downhill. So then we get the part where his ego gets to him too. I think that also propelled him to, you know, end up where he did at the second part of the book. He is egotistical, arrogant, narcissistic in that particular moment. He's like, yeah, I can do this by myself. We don't got no leaders, but I'm the leader kind of situation. So that was like, come on, bro, come on. Like, you know you effing up. But he doesn't care, so he goes and does them himself, and he gets caught. Although I have a theory, so let me know if you agree with me. Dim killed the old lady. Because, like, he gets knocked out, right? That's why he can't run away, and Dim kind of hits him too to kind of knock him out. And then the lady mysteriously dies, even though he didn't hit her as hard. Like, I reread it, because I was like, what the fuck? The lady doesn't, like, she's still kind of alive, but then we later found out she dies. So I feel like when Dim hit him, he hit the old lady for good measure, so for sure Alex would get in trouble for it. That's my theory, and I feel like it was enforced, especially when we meet Dim again later on in this story. Put in jail 14 years. Jail only makes him worse instead of better, because that's what jail usually does to people. So he gets worse instead of better. And then he kills that. He was important. He was like a magister or something. I know that's probably Harry Potter. He gets hit. He kills somebody important. So then he gets sent to the Reform Institute. I don't remember what it's called exactly. And damn. Things, I mean, he gets what he deserves in a way, but at the same time, it was really, like, when they were telling him that, like, I thought that he was going to get, like, electroshock therapy, because that's, like, a thing that people used to do, and I was like, they're gonna, and, like, shave his head off or something. So when we find out that it's actually conditioning, that they're conditioning him to get disgusted at the idea of violence, that was interesting. It was effective, definitely. But you can also see the humanity in him a little bit, where, you know, he does do violent things for the sake of violence, but there's even, I'm saying violence so much, there's even a point where violence becomes too much. Like, it's too much, even for him. And then, obviously, the added side effects of all the drugs in his system did not help. Also, one thing I did feel bad for him, though, in that particular, like, part, was that his music was used against him. So he associated, you know, Beethoven and all that stuff to this conditioning that he was being forced into. So he graduates, he moves on, we find ourselves again out in the free world with him, and he meets the old men that beat him up, which was hilarious. It's like, yeah, just a bunch of old men are gonna beat you up. You can't do anything about it because you're conditioned to not function like a normal human being. It was just, I think I have like I'm actually starting to, like, because I'm horrible. There is a particular part that, okay, does God want goodness or the choice of goodness? Is a man who chooses the bad perhaps in some way better than the man who has the good imposed upon him? So that was one of the quotes that really resonated with me for this particular point, and I think that was kind of also the point of the entire story, is that you kind of can't force good upon people. And then they call the cops, and we find out who the cops are. Dim. We knew he was going to come back and bite Alex in the ass. I feel like I certainly saw it coming, especially since he was the reason that he was in jail. So another part, again, here comes the thing with the ultra violence without being explicit. They could take him out and they beat him, and I'm pretty sure they rape him, because there's a part where he's like, there was a lot of panting and thudding or something like that. So I'm gonna go with they raped him, which feels like something that would happen, particularly in this kind of world where raping is so common. So the old man from the beginning comes back, and he essentially takes Alex in, and that kind of is where things really shift for Alex. He finds out that the girl that they raped died. I'm going to assume, again, that the way that he reacts, she might have killed herself as opposed to actually dying. That's just me. We see him getting taken in by this organization that the only reason that they're doing anything is because they can't against the government, which is also such a faulty thing that you see kind of people take a stance against something just for the sake of taking a stand against something. Yes, the idea is important, like, yes, they're doing this to people, it's inhumane, but when Alex asks them, what about me? what am I gonna get out of all of this? And nobody has an answer for him. So it's also super, I think, important in the overall story arc. He ends up throwing himself out of the window because they play his classical music, and that's how bad his conditioning was. Like, we don't really understand how bad it is because he's mostly telling us as opposed to showing us, because he is telling us his story. So that was, you know, you kind of saw the extent of really what they had done to him. My friend, we talked about this, we were like, how do you think that they deconditioned him? She's saying that it might have been the blood transfusion that they did, because, you know, the chemicals went out of system and it was so soon after the conditioning that that might have been it. I'm gonna assume I told her, I was like, maybe they did something to him, because I was like, he did hit his head, he did break a lot of bones. That trauma alone, who knows? What do you guys think? Do you guys surgery or blood transfusion, or do you guys have a different idea of what might have happened? Then, you know, he gets good, he has his job, and we find out, see, this is where the last chapter comes in. You didn't read the last chapter. I feel like this is a introduction or the beginning of a redemption arc for Alex. And if we didn't have that 21st chapter, we wouldn't see that. He kind of gets tired of the life, and he understands that he's getting older, and perhaps the ultra-violence life isn't for him. And that's kind of where we end off. I very much liked it. Did you guys notice that every chapter started with the same sentence, and the first and last chapter had basically the mirrored exact same first paragraph, except obviously chapter with different names. And at the end, you kind of like, he's like, well, you know, this is where our story is ending. And that was that. So I did very much think it was a beginning of a redemption arc for Alex. If I didn't have that 21st chapter, I would have felt cheated, definitely, by a landslide. Yeah, I very much like this book. Again, the only reason I did not give it a 5 out of 5 is because of that language. It is very difficult sometimes, especially if you're not paying attention, to understand maybe exactly what's going on, because some words are used for two different things, like glazzies and lipso and the real horror show and stuff like that. In certain contexts, they meant something else. So that's the only thing where I was like, come on, dude, like, you're gonna go in as a dictionary or something. Maybe if I heard it in an audiobook, it would have been a little different, but I didn't. I read it, so that's why. So yes, did you dislike it? How did you feel about the language? Did you feel like it was explicit? I personally didn't think it was explicit as it could have been. It's still pretty, you know, out there, but it's not as explicit as I expected it to be. Did you guys agree with that part of it? Tell me all that down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this particular book, because I know it gets taught in schools. I personally don't think it's a good idea for it to get taught in high schools. Maybe college, but definitely not high schools. So that's all for me. If you want to see more of my face, feel free to hit that subscribe button. If not, have a good morning, afternoon, or night, whenever it is you're watching this, and happy readings. Adios!